As we come to this point, and we're talking about, okay, how do we end well? I just want to remind you again, this is a principles conversation, not an example conversation. There's no point in Scripture where we go to and it says, well, this is how you end a relationship well, or this is how you break up in 3 steps. So what we're doing is we're looking at, okay, what are the principles that would impact this? And I want to jump right into it today because there's only 2 principles that we're going to talk through. The first one is obvious. All of us know this. We understand it. You're going to agree with it 100%. The second one is super countercultural, but both of them impact the way in which we operate in the relationship, and therefore, the way in which the relationship ends. And I think they set the relationship up to, even if it doesn't make it, even if it doesn't grow to become something else, that it can actually end in a way that while it may be difficult, it won't be destructive. So let's jump right in. We're going to jump into principle 1. And the principle one is actually a quote from Jesus. And all of us, we would say, yeah, absolutely. Principle 1 is this: the truth will set you free. Colossians 3:9 says, do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices. And so he says, I want for you to tell the truth. Don't lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices. Now, all of us would say, no, you shouldn't lie. None of you, when I said that, thought, oh my goodness, that's so profound. I never thought about being honest in a relationship before. I always thought it would work better if you lied to each other. No, none of us are there. All of us understand. Okay, no, you should be honest. This is important. All of us would say that, of course that's true. Of course. And yet, we lie to each other all the time. All the time. And especially in dating relationships. We lie to each other all the time. It's funny to watch how this works out. And so your friend starts to date someone, and all of a sudden they're running all the time. Oh yeah, I'd love to go for a run. Never ran a day in their life. Oh yeah, no, I love Indian food too. Oh no, that beard looks great. When obviously it doesn't. We do this all the time. And you say, well, wait. Those are just little things. Those are just small lies. But we don't just lie to each other about the small things. One of the things that oftentimes happens in dating relationships is we lie to each other about where we are in the relationship. I love you too. When you're not actually there yet. What I love about that song is the way that she talks about this, because she says, I guess you didn't mean what you wrote about me in that song, because you said forever, and now I drive alone down your street. And she's pointing out something that's actually true, and that is this. When we lie to each other about where we are in the relationship, it sets the relationship up where if it ends, it will end very poorly. But we're not honest. And God says one of the things that you have to put off is lying, not just the big things, but in the little things. You've got to get rid of this. And one of the things that you want to make sure of in the relationship is that the other person actually knows where you are, that you're actually honest about it, even though it may be difficult. And even though they may say, I love you, for you to be able to communicate, I'm not there yet. Or to be able to be in the midst of a relationship and say, I don't think we're connecting necessarily the way that we used to. And you say, yeah, but that's going to be really difficult to say. Yeah, but it's going to be worse if you're not honest as you move through it. And so God says, you've got to be honest. There's a phrase that's oftentimes used in employment where people will say someone should never be surprised when their job's terminated. No one should ever be surprised when they get fired. There should be a process. You should be honest enough. They should see it coming. The same thing is actually true about a relationship. They shouldn't be surprised. You should have already been honest with them. It shouldn't be, no, we're going to be together forever, and then the next day, I don't think this is going to work out. No, there should be, now notice here I put reverting the relationship back to what it was before, because this is not that we don't have a relationship anymore. We talked about this last week, that no, inside of God's family, we are in relationship to one another, but it's not going to be this anymore. It's going to have to revert back to what it was before, but that should not surprise them. Why? Because you should be honest. And if we're going to do this well, this principle of telling the truth, it's critical. And again, not just in the big things, also in the small things. You don't want for the person that you're with to become comfortable lying to you. And you don't want to become comfortable lying in a relationship. And make no mistake about it, lying is a learned comfort. Now, I'll take this into account. I know some of you were just born good at it. So some of you didn't have to learn it. You were comfortable with it from day one. And it's interesting to watch this with my boys, because I have one son that I think from the moment that he was born, he's just comfortable lying. It comes natural to him. He doesn't think about it. It's just, he's very good at it. My other son, when he tries to lie, he almost trips. It physically impacts him as he's talking, and so you see it's in different places. Now don't worry, he's practicing, so he'll get better at it. And some of you have practiced a lot and you've gotten better at it, but lying is a learned comfort. It's not necessarily naturally comfortable, and you're trying to figure out how to manipulate and figure out how to communicate this so that you can lie to it. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And this is true inside of a relationship. If you get comfortable with it inside of a relationship, even with the other person, at first, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but then the more that you practice it, the better you get. And you don't get good at it with the big things, you get good at it with the little things, and then one day you lie about something big and you think to yourself, where did that come from? Well, you got comfortable. And now it's easy. This principle impacts relationships more than we think. We've got to think about this a little deeper than we typically do. And when you become comfortable with it in the small things, it will be really easy when it comes to the big things. So don't allow yourself to get comfortable lying. And you don't want the other person to grow comfortable lying either. This means that you should not put the person you're in a relationship with in a situation where you want them to lie to you. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, I would never do that. Why would you ever put someone in a position where you want them to lie to you? I don't even think I know how that would show up. Oh, it shows up. You buy that new outfit and you walk in. What do you think? Do you really want to know? Or do you want them to lie to you? Early on at Hoboken Grace, I had to work through this in an interesting way with Anna, because after every conversation, I walk out and I get feedback. Usually Anthony's with me, Justin's with me, Sarah's with me, and they're giving me feedback on the conversation, how it went, what we could do better, and this made sense, or you kind of lost me here. And early on at Hoboken Grace, I used to invite Anna to be part of that process. But here's the problem. Anna can crush me. And for those of you who don't know, that's my wife. Anna can crush me in 2 words. I mean, crush me. So if I walked out and Anna said, I don't think that hit, I'd be like, oh, man, I'm a failure. But it hit me in a way that I could not bounce back from. I couldn't handle. And she started to feel that tension and feel like maybe I just need to be encouraging and say that it went well no matter what. And so we decided that's not a healthy place for her to be, because I can't handle it and I don't want her to lie to me. And it's not that I don't ask for her feedback, I just wait until I have 6 hours for recovery. But you don't want to put them in a position where they feel like they have to lie to you. At the core of your relationship is trust, and if you lose it, you lose. And so don't mess around with it, even when it comes to the small things. Move into the relationship and say, no, we're going to be honest with each other. And this drastically impacts the way that a relationship would end. But people will say to me, well, but Chris, you got to understand, if I'm honest with them, it's going to be uncomfortable. And if I'm honest with them, it's going to hurt them. And it's going to hurt their feelings when I say that I'm not there yet, when they say that they love me. And it's going to upset them when I say that I don't know that we're really connecting the way that we used to. And that's where the first principle connects with the second principle. Because if we're going to practice the first principle, we actually have to understand the second principle. Now, this one's really countercultural. Because the second principle is this: love cares about the person more than the person's feelings. Love cares about the person more than the person's feelings. And as God steps into our life, he actually communicates this to us. And he says, listen, I'm going to care about you even when it's difficult. I'm going to love you. And he specifically communicates, sometimes love hurts. Sometimes being loved well hurts. And God steps into our life, and he says this about his discipline. In Hebrews, it's teaching us about God's discipline. He says, because the Lord disciplines the one that he loves. He says, no, because I love you, sometimes I'm going to do some things in your life that are going to be really difficult. Later on in the passage, it actually describes God's discipline as painful. He says, but this is not in contradiction to love. It's actually part of love. And so because I love you, I'm going to do some things that are going to be difficult. Ephesians 4 talks about this in each other's lives. It says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. He says, in order for us to grow up, we have to speak the truth. This idea of being honest in love and understanding that love is not when we ignore the truth that needs to be spoken, but love is when we actually speak it, knowing that it may be difficult to hear. Now, this is phenomenally countercultural because of the fact that, as we talked about in week 1, for many of us, we don't want to be loved, we want to be worshiped. And when it comes to worship, there is no correction or challenge. There's just worship. And we want to be worshiped. And I want for you to care about my feelings more than you care about me. And so even though you know it's what I actually need to hear, even though you know that it's what actually needs to happen in my life. No, I want for you to care about my feelings and how I feel more than you care about me. And then it's interesting how this has continued to develop inside of our culture, because it's come to the point now where it's, I want for you to take responsibility for my feelings. Not just do I want for you to act caring most about how I feel about what you will say or what I do, but now I want for you to take responsibility for my feelings. And you're the one, you've got to think through everything that you do. You have to think through how I'm going to feel about it. Not whether or not it's right, not whether or not it's love, not whether or not it's truth. But how do I feel about it? This is why what you meant to say doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter what you meant to say. Inside of our culture, intention has been trumped by perception. Intention has been trumped by perception. In other words, it doesn't matter what you intended to say, it just matters how I heard it, how I perceived it. And you are responsible for that. And so rather than us experiencing loving correction, we just communicate enabling flattery. Rather than us actually speaking the truth and love. We just speak enabling flattery because I just want to make sure that I don't hurt their feelings. And this has everything to do with this progression that we've been seeing happen inside of our culture. And I've been talking to our staff about this for about 12 years now. And we've been watching this just continue to happen. And at the core of it is this idea that, no, I'm God. At the core of it is this idea that there is no God. I'm my own God, and I determine the morality of my universe, and I will dictate it to you. And if you don't abide by it, if you offend it in any way, shape, or form, then you will suffer my righteous wrath. Because I determine what is true and moral in my universe. And then you're responsible not to offend it. But God steps into our life and he says, wait. That's not love. That's not love. And so as God steps into our life, he says to us, he says, listen, I'm not taking responsibility for your feelings, but I will take responsibility for loving you. He will not take responsibility for your feelings, but he will take responsibility for loving you. And I love how he teaches us this, because from the very beginning of the story, he teaches this. And from the very beginning of Scripture, you see this play out. So Adam and Eve act in rebellion to God, and they walk away from this relationship with God. And as a result, immediately you see God doing something that's very difficult for them. It's very painful for them because he removes them from the garden. He does it because of the way that he loves them, and he doesn't want for them to eat of the tree of life and live forever in a state of sin. And so he says, listen, we're going to remove them. Now, is it easy? Does it feel good? No, it's absolutely not. It's painful and it's hard, but it's also love. And then immediately after it, you see this exchange between him and Cain, one of Adam and Eve's sons. And in this, what I love about it is he so specifically and clearly calls this out. I want to take you to this story because Adam and Eve have two sons, Cain and Abel, and God has stepped into their life and said, listen, this is how you worship me. This is how you love me. I want for you to bring to me the first of what I've given to you. We talk about this every week. This is why we give, because we want to recognize everything's given to me by him, and so I'm going to give to him first. Well, he taught that from the very beginning of the story. And so Cain and Abel have been told this, and God says, this is how you honor me. This is how you recognize that everything you have is from me. You bring to me from the first of what I give to you. Now, as the story plays out, you see that the two brothers do this very differently. So listen to what it says. It says, now Abel kept flocks. In other words, he was a shepherd, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Now, pay attention to this phrase right here. In the course of time. In other words, Cain didn't bring to God first. Cain brought to God after he had figured out that everything was going to be okay. So in the course of time, after Cain knew that he had everything that he needed, then he gave to God. Abel, on the other hand, it says, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. So Abel doesn't wait to see is everything going to work out. He brings from the firstborn the way that God taught him to, the way that God had called him to. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So God interacts with both of them and says, okay, Abel, I accept your offering. Cain, I don't. Why? Because you didn't honor me. You didn't actually do what I called you to do. You didn't give from the first of what I gave you. You gave the leftovers of what I gave you. And so he says, no, I don't accept that one. As Cain experiences this, it says, the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. So Cain, rather than saying, oh, you know what? You're right. I didn't honor you, I'm sorry, rather than him repenting, in other words, changing direction and saying, okay, I'm going to do it differently next time. Instead, he becomes angry. And he's furious. How come Abel's offering was accepted and not my offering? And then God steps into this moment, and I love this passage because it's so powerful as it speaks to our cultural context. God steps into this moment, and he says this. It says, then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? So Cain gets angry, and God steps in and says, why are you angry? What are you doing? In other words, he steps into Cain's life and says, why are you throwing a fit? What's the fit for? Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? And here's what I love about this. And this is where it's so countercultural. God is stepping into Cain's life and saying, hey, Cain, your feeling of anger, it's invalid. It's invalid. Some of you are thinking, whoa, you can't say that. You're not allowed to say that. All feelings are valid. That's not what God says to Cain. He says, hey, Cain, your anger is not the correct response. It's not actually based on what's true or what's right or what's good. And this is one of the most significant things that some of you need to take out of this series, and it is this: not all of your feelings are valid. In other words, they're not all based on truth. Many of them are based on lies, and many of them are based on the things inside of us that are broken. When you look at this, what is the answer to this question? Why is Cain so angry? Why is it that he's so angry? Is it because of the fact that it was rejected? No. The root of his anger is pride. The root of his, at the core of that is pride, and God's saying that is not valid. You need to, and then I love how God speaks to this in Cain's life, because as he continues, he says this. He says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? He says, why are you angry? What is this feeling based on? Where's this feeling coming from? Don't you know? If you just do what's right, you know you'll be accepted. This isn't a complicated thing. You know the truth here. He says, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. And again, I love this passage because he says, hey, Cain, you got a decision to make here. Are you going to allow your anger to rule over you, or are you going to rule over it? Are your feelings going to be what rules over you, or are you going to rule over them? Inside the story, Cain allows his anger to rule over him, and he kills his brother. But from the beginning of the story, God is teaching us exactly what we said a couple weeks ago. Feelings are a great alert system. And Cain's feeling of anger should have alerted him to something was wrong. But they're a terrible navigation system. And if you don't learn how to rule over them, if they rule over you, they will navigate you right into destruction. And so he's saying, as God steps into our life, no, I'm not responsible, Cain, for how you feel. You're responsible for that. I'm not responsible for your response. You're responsible for it. And whether or not it's going to rule over you or you're going to rule over it. And as God steps into our life, make no mistake about it, he does not take responsibility for how we feel about him loving us, but he does take responsibility for consistently loving us. And sometimes because of our pride, sometimes because of lies that are within us, that love is going to be difficult, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to be painful. And in those moments, we're going to be tempted to run from him. In those moments, we're going to be tempted to reject the most loving thing and one that we have ever experienced. And we have to choose, will it rule over us or will we rule over it? God says love, and don't make no mistake about it, love still takes into account the feelings of the other person. I mean, look at 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind. We're not talking here about being unkind or not gentle, but we're talking about loving the other person enough to do what is right, loving the other person enough to be honest even when it's not easy to hear, even when it hurts. And God says, this is what love looks like. And inside of dating relationships, this shows up in a lot of different ways. As we said earlier, are we willing to be honest about where the relationship is? But then one of the other ways that I see this show up a lot is that relationships that should have ended keep going for far too long. And you know that it's not going to work out. But rather than caring for the other person, you're just worried, I don't want to offend them. I don't want them to be upset. And in the process, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Because you're not willing to actually love. And this shows up in all sorts of relationships. One of the ways that I see this show up here at Hoboken Grace oftentimes is that a leader will have a difficult conversation with someone. And it may be one of the most loving conversations that they've ever experienced. But the other person who heard it hates them for it. Why? Because they don't want to be loved. They just want to feel good. And in the process, when we live life that way, make no mistake about it, we push away everyone who actually loves us. Everyone who actually loves us, including God. Including God. And so we have to decide. This is one of those transformational truths. We have to decide, wait. The way that maybe I've thought about love, the way that the world around me thinks about love, that's not actually love. And in those moments where truth is spoken into our lives, in those moments where we're confronted, rather than responding in anger, rather than pushing them away, rather than driving them away, we stop to ask ourselves, okay, wait. Is that something that I needed to hear? Are they being honest? Because I don't want people in my life that just make me feel good. I want people in my life that love me. Because then together we can help each other to become who we're actually created to be. We have to change the way that we think about loving one another. And I think if we take these two things and we move into and through a relationship with these principles in mind, and we're honest, and we love in this way, and we accept love in this way, when it ends, it will still be difficult. But it won't be destructive. And inside that relationship and as a family together, we can, as Ephesians 4, we can continue to build each other up towards all that God created for us to be. Will you pray with me? Father, as we walk through this, I'm so grateful for how it is that you've loved us. I'm so grateful for what it is that you've taught us about love and this countercultural truth that love is not just making someone feel good, but that love is considering and being careful with their feelings while making sure that you speak the truth and making sure that you bring the challenge, the correction that's needed as it's needed, that we're honest with one another. And Father, I just pray that this would change the way that we think about your love. I pray that this would drastically impact the way that we look at love and the way that we as a family are able to experience and demonstrate it to one another. In Jesus' name, amen.